All right, well, good morning. Thank you all for joining us for this live webinar. Wanted to introduce our speaker. Tricia Baker is the Director of Human Resources here at GCFA, and we welcome you all to our presentation. Just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be sent out later on along with a couple other resources that we have for you. If you have any questions, we'll do a little Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And please, we ask that you post any questions in the chat bar, and we'll get to those at the end. So without further ado, we'll hand it over to Tricia.
Thank you, Andrew. Everyone should be able to see my screen at this point. So we're going to be talking about working from home and just some best practices. Of course, as always, I just want to say that this is not legal advice. GCFA does not give legal advice. These are just some best practices. And at the end of the webinar, when we send out our thank you email, we're going to attach an example telecommuting policy with just some verbiage and some things that you may find beneficial. Of course, you don't have to use the whole thing, but we wanted to provide that to you so you have some of the details that we're going through today if you do want to implement a working from home policy. So currently, we're in a very different world than we were 2 years ago, even a year and a half ago. Remote work is being seen by more industries and more individuals, and that is just any work that's done away from a physical office location. And it's estimated that right now about 50% of workers are working remotely in some capacity, whether that be full or part-time or from a different location. And of those individuals, about 91% of those want to continue to work remotely. And then it's estimated also that by 2025, approximately 36 million Americans will be working remotely. So today we just wanted to talk through best practices for working from home, your policies that you can put in place, just kind of a different shift in mindset in terms of working from home, developing a work from home policy and some things to consider for that, how to manage remote employees, and then if you do decide to have a hybrid work environment, how to best manage that. So just off the bat, the best thing that you can do if you have employees working remotely is trust that your employees are doing their work. If they are outside of a traditional office environment, it's easy to think, well, they're at home, they may not be completing their work, or I'm not sure what they're doing because I can't see them all day. So the best thing that you can do is start off with a mindset of yourself and your managers that you trust your employees are doing their work. And then you can gauge that by their performance, their work product, and things like that. When employees are remote, you're not all together, you want to prioritize communication. And that means that you want to have regular team meetings. You want to have regular all staff meetings. That's very important as well, just from a top-down communication standpoint, whether that be monthly, quarterly, just to touch base with the staff to make everyone feel connected. Everyone has their cameras on. Maybe you celebrate anniversaries or do the things that you would typically do in an all staff setting. And then from a manager's standpoint, you want to have your team meetings where maybe you have, executive meetings where communication is given to executive staff, then managers, get that information and give that information to their teams. They want to keep those team meetings so that everyone feels connected. And of course, those don't need to be just business. You can just connect with everyone. How's everyone doing? Does anyone have anything to share about their weekend or what's going on in their life? Just to connect with employees. And of course, one-on-one meetings are very important as well, whether those be weekly or biweekly, with managers meeting one-on-one with their staff, just to connect with them so that the employee doesn't feel isolated and completely out of the loop in things that are going on. They feel that connection with their manager. And of course, we're all familiar with video conferencing at this point, whether that be Zoom or Teams, Microsoft Teams, or WebEx. You want to take advantage of those for video conferencing. That just feels more of a connection than a phone call would. So that's something that if you don't currently have, of course, you would want to take advantage of that. And then make sure calendars are up to date and shared with your team, whether you share like the topic of the calendar meetings that you have, or however you share that information with your team. But you want to stay connected with them, make sure everyone knows, if you're going to be out of the office, or you need to know when your staff is out of the office because you're not going to see them, sitting down the hall from you. So just make sure everyone stays connected and knows what's going on. And then, of course, listening to the team members is very important, and being available to them, whether that be through a Teams call or a quick connection. It's easy to get inundated in meetings and not have time during the day to meet, but you just want to be flexible and try to be available for staff. So if you have staff working remotely, of course, you're going to want to set your employees up for success by having necessary equipment available to them. So of course, laptops and monitors, that's something that you may have in the office, but employees may not have at home. I know it's a lot easier for a lot of employees to get work done with 1 or 2 monitors. So you need to decide, are you going to provide that to employees, or how are you going to go about doing that? Of course, keyboard and mouse, pretty straightforward. Anything that will assist in setting up kind of an ergonomic workstation where they don't have to type on their laptop, just the items that they would be using in the office as well. Do you need more docking stations? What are you going to do if one of the docking stations go out? How will you handle that type of request? Of course, if they need microphones or headsets, you need to consider that as well. If they have one in the office that they could take home, that would be great. But if they need a different type of headset because of their work environment, you may want to consider that as well. And of course, again, the conferencing software, Teams, Zoom, WebEx, you want to make that available to employees. We utilize Teams. However, when we're speaking with individuals at different annual conferences, they may not have access to Teams, so we would utilize Zoom in those situations. So you just want to have a couple of different sort of softwares available so that employees can connect with the individuals that they need to connect with. And then you may need some sort of cloud environment, or also VPN software, because you, again, will need to keep your information available to employees, but you want to keep it secure. I know sometimes VPNs may have a certain number of connections if you're not used to having a lot of remote staff. So that's something that you can work with your IT team with to make sure that employees can connect to your network, but then also have a firewall or some sort of security so that they can keep any sort of information that they have secure. So another option in terms of offering employees items is to give a stipend. And a stipend is just a lump sum of funds that employees can use if they work remotely to purchase items that they may need to set up their home office. So that could be a new chair. Maybe they don't have an office chair and it's not comfortable sitting in a dining room chair all day working. So if you offer a stipend, then they can purchase things that they may need, whether that be desk chairs, printer, ink, paper, things like that. Or maybe if you have perks that they normally would get if they were in the office, such as coffee, internet access or stipends, internet access funds, or any sort of discount that you would offer, a stipend would kind of cover all those bases. So you would need to decide if it would be a one-time payment, whether that be one lump sum, or it would be an annual payment, a quarterly payment. That's completely up to you. So in terms of what you pay employees for their work environment, there's a couple of different options. You could pay a stipend that is not required by law. Again, it is just a payment to them to cover the items that they deem that they need for their work environment. And then you also have reimbursements. And so that could mean if they go and buy printer paper or ink, you're going to reimburse them. The best thing that you can do in this situation is have a clear policy on what you will and will not pay for. So a stipend would just be, again, a lump sum. They can go buy what they need. Reimbursements would be they have to show you proof that they bought the items, and then you would reimburse them for those funds. Depending on which state you're in, reimbursements may be required for certain items. So you're going to want to look into that. But just some things to consider just to make your employees more comfortable at home and allow them for a more productive work setup. So when it comes to working from home, it's easy to become inundated with your access to your computer. Normally, if you leave the office, you stop working, you go home, and it is kind of a shift in mindset. But when you're working from home, Sometimes employees may not be able to turn it off, to be able to walk away because the computer is sitting in the next room. So make sure that employees try to keep their schedules as close to normal working hours as possible. If you see emails coming through from employees later in the evening or on weekends when they really don't need to be working, of course, you're going to want to address that and try to make sure that they keep normal working hours so that they don't get burnt out. And make sure that employees are taking breaks during the day, stepping away so that they don't get overwhelmed by back-to-back meetings. Of course, in the office, they can walk down to the break room and take some time away or get up and go get coffee. At home, they may be tempted to just sit and work. So encourage employees to take breaks throughout the day so that they can come back and focus and then again have a work-life balance and turn it off at the end of the day. Flexibility during this time is very important. This is a hard time for everyone. The shift in how the world is, in how the working environment is, in how childcare is, how school environments are. This is a difficult time for everyone. And so you want to be flexible for employees because things do come up. If something does come up and you need to make an exception for an employee, maybe they need to start working later on so that they can get their kids to school, or they need to get set up later for childcare coverage, something like that. You could be flexible in that and allow them to work outside of their normal hours. Of course, if they have to be available to customers or something like that, those are things to consider in terms of schedules. But if you have the capability to be flexible, of course, that's always beneficial. And then it's easy to have the urge to micromanage employees when they're at home because, again, you can't see them, but you want to resist that urge. And again, trust that they are doing their work unless you start to see issues with performance or issues with providing you work product or things of that nature. So you want to make sure that you are recognizing employees for the good work that they do, whether that be in a team meeting or in all staff. That is very motivating to employees to be recognized for the work they do. You don't want them to feel like, again, that they're isolated, they're out there in the world doing work and you're not seeing that they are doing good work for you. So if you want to stop and recognize employees and praise them for the work that they do, that's always beneficial. It can be very motivating for employees. And it's easy to forget to do that when you're not seeing them every day and you're not face to face. So when it comes to a work-life balance, make sure you set limits on when employees can work. Again, you want to be flexible, but you also want core office hours. If you expect an employee to be available from, 9 to 5, you need to set those expectations. And if you expect them to be at their computer and available for calls, for Teams calls and working, you need to set that too. You need to state, you don't need to work from your phone. That may be tempted for some employees because they're at home or they may be running errands. And so they may want to just work from their phone. But if you expect them to be available and be working at their computer, that's something that you should articulate to them and just set that expectation of you need to be available on your computer or have access to your computer during these hours so that, we can contact you or you can get your work done. Again, employees may be tempted to just keep working. They're at home. They're not thinking of taking vacation. Employees may not be traveling right now. So it's important to make sure they're using their vacation in their personal time, just so they take some time away. They close the laptop and they go do something for themselves, step away and get things done. So just kind of keep an eye on if employees are using their vacation or personal time, or if they have this is towards the end of the year, you're maybe going to your rollover process. Just make sure that employees are taking that time off and stepping away and they're not getting burnout. And just make sure that employees aren't doing too much and they don't have that work-life balance. That's just something to keep in mind. Again, if you're getting emails at night, during the weekends, when there's nothing urgent going on, just make sure you're addressing that and making sure that employees are stepping away and you're having that conversation. So when it comes to a work from home policy, you're going to want to keep several things in mind. Are you going to have everyone be eligible to work from home? Is that something that you're interested in? Are you going to have a hybrid workspace where some employees come in a few days a week, or all employees come in 2 days a week and then work remotely 3 days a week? Is everyone eligible in terms of what they do? Is your receptionist able to work from home, or does she need to be in the office to answer the door, to answer the phone? You need to consider those things and put that in your policy. And again, we're going to be sending you an example of the policy that covers several different types of working arrangements, whether it be an informal, temporary work from home, whether it be a formal work from home that's approved by management. You definitely don't want to make it a guaranteed benefit of employment unless you have someone who works far away from your office, because things could change. You may need someone in the office later on. So we'll give you verbiage on how to phrase those policies so that if something changed in the future and you needed to change the working environment, that you can do so. And then how are you going to track time? If you have hourly staff members, you're going to make sure that you have to track their time. And if they're working, you do have to pay them for that time. So do you track their time electronically? Do they clock in and out through your HRIS system? Or are they keeping a written timesheet? You just need to make sure you know how you're going to track time for hourly staff members. And then how are you going to communicate to those staff members? What are your expectations for their performance? When do you expect for them to be available? How are you going to make sure that the information is secure? Again, are you going to utilize VPN, firewalls, things like that? And then you want to decide in advance what expenses you're going to cover. So are you going to offer a stipend? Are you going to state that you'll reimburse for printer ink in all circumstances? You just need to have that in your policy so that if those situations do arise, you can be consistent and fair in how those are applied. So again, going back to those hourly staff members, you want to make sure that you are tracking their time, because again, you do have to pay hourly staff members for all time worked, even if it's not approved overtime. If they are working, you have to track those work hours and you have to pay them for it. So if they're at home and they're going to check email at 7 o'clock and they're responding to emails, but they're not clocked in, that's something your managers are going to need to keep an eye out for. If they are working, but they're not clocked in, they need to address that immediately and make sure that employees are paid appropriately and that is addressed. The best thing that you can do is have a policy in place that employees are paid for all work hours and employees are expected to report all of their work hours and that they are not allowed to work off the clock. And that will be addressed appropriately if it happens. Because if they're at home, again, you can't see that they're leaving the building or they're coming in for the day. So you want to make sure they're not doing things off the clock and that you are paying them for all of their time. So you do have to make sure that you show reasonable diligence in tracking their work time. So that's going to be having a policy or procedure on how hourly staff members clock in and out, but also your policies that you have in place. And if you find out someone is working off the clock, let's say you get an email on Tuesday night at 10 o'clock, and you address that with the employee and you say, okay, I see that you're working at 10 o'clock. You need to report those hours. Did you work from 9 to 10? You need to put that on your timesheet. You don't really have an obligation to dig further and start, trying to find out if they worked additional hours, but you do have to pay them for that time. And then you need to address it so that they don't do that going forward. So when it comes to workers' compensation, again, everyone's kind of navigating this new environment, but remote workers could be covered if there was an injury or illness that occurred while they were completing a work task during work hours and working from home. And this could be something like a fall or what they call cumulative injuries. So it could be carpal tunnel from typing or back pain from an inappropriate chair. So again, that's where having a designated workspace and having a comfortable and ergonomic workspace is going to come into play, because if you do have an employee who comes forward and says, because I work from home, I have carpal tunnel, or, I've been having this back pain that I didn't have before, they have to prove that the injury was work related. But if they don't have a good setup at home, your workers' compensation carrier will be getting involved in determining if that was a work-related injury or not. And you could potentially have to pay a claim for something of that nature. So you are responsible for providing the same safe work environment that they would have in the office. If they came on site, you will also have to provide that to remote workers. So by having a policy that says that employees must have a designated workspace, comfortable workspace, maybe you provide documentation on how to set up your workspace so that it is ergonomically appropriate. And you give them a guide that says, here's where your monitor should be, here's how your chair should be set up, so that you're showing you're trying to do your due diligence and have that safe work environment for an employee at home. So when it comes to compliance, and there are some things that you also need to consider. So like we said, make sure that you state when employees should and should not be working, set those core office hours so that they're not expected to work all hours of the day. For hourly staff members, you definitely want to have a set work day in terms of when they clock in, clock out. If your state requires a lunch break, they still have to take that lunch break. So even though they're at home, if, for example, in Tennessee, if an hourly staff member works 6 hours, they have to have a 30-minute unpaid lunch break where they clock out, step away, and then come back. And it can't be added to the beginning or the end of the day. It has to be during the workday. So even though they're at home, your managers should be looking at the time cards and making sure that those staff members are taking that lunch and that they are actually not working during that time. Make sure that, again, you have training on the workstation setup and the safety at home. Make sure that you're giving them those guidelines and discussing that with staff members. Make sure they're comfortable at home and set up appropriately. And labor laws, again, vary by state. So your state may have a meal break policy, it may not. So when you do draft a policy or review your policies related to this, make sure you're consulting a local employment attorney because they are going to be able to give you the best guidance in terms of the safety laws and the meal break laws for your state. So when it comes to employment posters, so everyone should have those printed in the office. Maybe you got one of those all-in-one posters that has all the federal and all the state. Well, now that employees are working remotely, what are your obligations? So you do need to make sure that you have those posted and available to all staff, including those that are working remotely. So if you are required to have certain state posters and then your federal posters, you need to have those up in some sort of electronic space, whether that be a SharePoint site, maybe your HRIS system has the capability to have documents. There needs to be somewhere that employees can access those files. All of the state and federal posters are available online through the state website or the Department of Labor website. So you can access those, download them as PDFs, and then post them somewhere. If you have a shared drive or some sort of shared site that employees can access, maybe it's your work website. Maybe you have a page for employees where you can access those and update those. But again, you can download those PDFs and have those available, and you should let employees know where they can access those posters. Sometimes we have one-off communications. For example, last year, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, they issued a poster that had to be posted at all work locations. In that circumstance, you could email that out to all the employees and then also post it and have it available. But that email blast is going to be fine for those one-time notifications that come about. And I believe that had to be posted through the end of the year last year. So you just want to make sure you're staying on top of that. If you have employees in the office still, you'll update your bulletin board with the posters. Then you also have your electronic copies available. And then if you have an online applicant tracking system or you do your new hire paperwork online, you want to make sure that you give those posters as part of that new hire packet. That's just always beneficial so they can cover your bases and make sure that employees have access to that. So when it comes to managing employees who are at home, it's very different. Again, I keep saying that, but it's different from being in the office. There are lots of distractions, whether that be laundry or things that they need to get done at home. It's sitting next to them. They're looking at their floors. They're looking at their laundry. They're looking at the things in their house and thinking that they need to get those things done in addition to having work. So you want to make sure that you are setting clear guidelines in terms of what you expect from your employee and what they need from you. So for example, I have a 3-year-old and I have twin 8-month-olds. They are at daycare right now because I could not get anything done at all, much less work, if they were all here. So working from home is not necessarily a replacement for childcare, dependent childcare. You know, you can't do both things if you have children at that age. So you want to make sure that you clarify to employees, you are working during these hours and this needs to be your priority. And you want to make sure that they set clear expectations with their families about what needs they have and how the families can meet those needs. Because if you're working from home, you are still working. You're not just sitting at home checking emails and doing other things. The expectation should be set with staff that they are available and they are working during certain hours. So it's important that they have a designated workspace free of distractions where they can complete their work. So if you need to have that conversation with them to designate how they create their own workspace, you know, it could be that they have a designated room at home that they work in. Room dividers are an option. I've seen several individuals that get those. This was from Amazon. This is Room Divider. That kind of blocks the distractions and blocks the background. Maybe they need noise canceling headphones. Maybe they need a headset because there are background sounds that they can't get away from. How are they going to best do their job and best be free from distractions, be available for meetings, and still do the things that they need to do for you during their work time? And the best thing about a designated workspace is they can go to it in the morning. I know employees that work for GCFA do this. They pack up their things, they go to their designated room, they work. When they're in there, they're working. As far as the people that are at home with them know, they are working. That's their work time. And then at the end of the day, they close the laptop, they pack up, and they go back to the rest of the house. And then they are off work. So the employees just need to know that they need to have a designated time during the day when they work and a designated workspace just so they can get things done. And again, you're going to want to just keep up with their performance, keep up with how they're doing at home and kind of track that, because maybe you want to do telecommuting on a temporary basis, maybe just see how things go. If everyone's still as productive, temporarily do a working from home situation, you know, that's really up to you. But at this point, probably everyone has kind of seen what working from home can and cannot accomplish, because I know many offices have been closed at this point. You know, many individuals have been remote, so you probably have an idea of how that's going to work going forward for you. And again, you want to keep communication open. You want to maintain check-ins with employees. These could be daily, these could be weekly. It's really up to your team and what they need. Maybe you have one day, every Wednesday, you have a team meeting, and then you have your one-on-ones on Thursday. Just try to keep those meetings with employees so that they feel valued. That's their one-on-one time or their time with their manager, so that they can get anything that they need to, especially if you're in meetings a lot and you're hard to connect with. You want to keep those meetings so that you can connect with employees. And again, one-on-one meetings and team meetings are essential. This clear communication makes sure everyone's on the same page, and it builds a sense of community and rapport and connection with staff members. And you want to err on the side of over communicating. You definitely don't want to under communicate, especially as you're building this work from home process. So one of the things that you're going to miss out on, and employees are going to miss out on, is the social aspect of being in the office, being in the break room, connecting with people, talking about weekends, talking about what people have going on at home. And so they miss out on those informal communications that they have with their coworkers and with their manager. This could lead them to feel isolated and that they have a lack of community. So you want to make sure you have activities where people can feel connected. Make sure people have their cameras on. Again, I say that, but it's easier to connect during these virtual meetings if individuals have their cameras on, because you want them to feel connected to their work and to their coworkers. So if you do have scheduled meetings, maybe you have some sort of social interaction where you can talk about non-work items, talk about, again, updates people have, things that are going on in their lives. Maybe you send care packages to their team around Christmas or Easter with just something to make them know that you're thinking about them, whether that be a snack or you know, some sort of fun little thing for their kids, if they have kids. something of that nature, just something that they can receive at home so that they can know you're thinking about them. Maybe you're having an all staff meeting. Maybe you send everyone some sort of snack so that they can enjoy it during the all staff meeting. Just some things to consider. You could play virtual games. Maybe you have a weekly trivia game. You have someone who loves trivia who's on your team. Crowdpur.com is a site that we have used at GCFA for trivia during different meetings. It's free for up to 20 participants. You can ask a question. Employees can log into a specific site, type in a code, and then they can answer. And it's just a fun game that everyone can play. And if you have, of course, a meeting pulled up, everyone can kind of engage as they're playing trivia. A game such as match a baby picture with the employee. Maybe you have everyone email in a baby picture and you play a game where you pull that up and everyone guesses who it is, or they access a link and they guess who it is, and then you go through them as a team during all staff. Everyone gets a laugh. I know I have a baby picture where I'm in a blue polo sitting on a bucket holding a fishing pole, and that tricks everyone because they think it's a little boy and it's me. I love to use that picture whenever I have that come up at work. So just something that you can feel engaged in with employees. 2 truths and a lie, where you state, again, 2 truths and a lie, and people have to guess which one of the 3 is the lie. You get to know employees on a different level, but it's also fun. 10 strikes is where everyone sends in a fun fact about themselves, and then everyone holds up 10 fingers so you can see everyone, and then you name the fun facts, and if someone hasn't done it, they put their fingers down, and whoever has fingers left at the end wins. Again, you're learning something about your employees, you're building rapport with employees, and they're getting to socially engage. And then bingo is a pretty easy game to play. You can find an electronic bingo game online and send out bingo cards to everyone and they can play. Just something that is not work related, where everyone can get together, where they would normally do that if they were in the office. So these are just, again, ideas where that people can feel connected in this different workspace. And again, this is a difficult time for everyone. So make sure you check in with employees and see how they're doing. And if you have a temporary work from home policy, where if someone has to be home because they're quarantining or isolating, but they can still work remotely, that is something you can do. That's going to create a more difficult situation for an employee because they're dealing with this illness or this potential quarantine for themselves or someone in their family. It's a difficult time across the board. So be prepared to actively listen to employees. Let them talk about their concerns if they have any. If they're having hardships with working from home, maybe they would rather be in the office. Listen to that as well, and consider if that is something that you would like to do. So even if you can't help, just listening to employees could make a difference. And if you have an employee assistant program that you provide as part of your benefits package, that's something that you can definitely provide to employees, because you're not their therapist. You're not acting as their therapist. You can listen to their concerns, but if they have bigger things going on in this difficult time, having an employee assistance program is essential, because it's a free service that's offered to employees, and they get something as simple as maybe access to a therapist. I know for GCFA employees and the general agencies, our employee assistance program offers 5 free sessions with a therapist. So that has been something that we have offered to multiple employees during this time and just made available. It's confidential. It's a third party. No one that works for the agencies knows who utilizes that service. But an employee assistance program is something that's relatively cost effective that could be available through your medical plan or other provider. If you don't offer that, then I would definitely recommend looking into that. So can employees move out of state? This is something that you want to thoroughly discuss with an employee who is working remotely and wants to move out of state, but you also discuss internally to determine where they're going, and if you are able to have employees working in that state. So you want to make sure that you discuss the work duties and responsibilities that this person has. If you were to ultimately have everyone come back into the office, is that employee going to be able to continue working remotely? Is their job conducive to permanently working from home? You need to discuss the work hours and the timekeeping in terms of their job. And then the use of the company equipment that you have. Are you going to be able to ship them replacements? Are you going to be able to get the things that they need to them if they work far away? And then how are you going to protect the information security and the data that you have in another state? Do you have that capability? Of course, if employees are already working remotely, you probably do. But if you have someone who needs to move in this circumstance, can you accommodate that? And there are state and local laws that you need to consider. Income tax, you're probably going to have to set up withholding and get registered to pay taxes in that state. So are you able to do that and get that set up? Of course, you may need to register in their county, their city, depending on where they move. So you want to research that. But are there job posters? So again, we mentioned the state and federal posters that you have to have available electronically or in person. You want to look at the posting requirements for that state and make sure that you have those posters available for that employee as well. Does that state have any type of paid family or sick leave? So do you need to set up a new deduction code or earning code in your payroll to make sure that you're taking out the appropriate taxes or sick leave that, for that location? If they move to Washington, D.C., they're going to have different withholdings than probably where you are currently because of those current local laws. So just make sure you're doing your due diligence and researching that from that standpoint. And then workers' compensation, they're going to need to know that your employees work in that state because every state has different workers' compensation laws. And so your carrier would need to look into some things that you may need to consider, and you're probably going to have a different workers' compensation posting for them. And then they'll need to have workers' compensation providers on a workers' comp panel of providers for where they live. So just some things to consider in terms of if they're out of state. You're going to have to look into that. I think state laws related to minimum wage or other state regulations, you're going to have to follow those state regulations. So you will have to do some research and due diligence in determining if what you need to do if you do allow an employee to move and work out of state. And then if an employee does leave, whether it's voluntarily or not, you need to have a process by which you're going to handle that. How are you going to make sure all of their access is cut off in terms of your systems and your emails? How are you going to get all of the equipment that they have back from them? So make sure you're clear in your communication to them and what you're going to be doing. Of course, you want to wish them well, and you want to offer to help in any way, depending on if it's voluntarily or involuntarily, and next steps. But you need to have some way planned to get the equipment back from them, whether that be sending them a shipping label and they go and purchase a box and you reimburse them for that, or if you send them a box big enough for all of their equipment, make sure you're clear on what equipment needs to be sent back. Do they have a credit card? Are you going to cut that off? Are you going to cut access to different systems? Do they still have a badge to the building? Are you going to cut that off remotely? So just have a plan and how you're going to get all that information back and get all that equipment as well. And then if you have a hybrid work environment, so this is something because recently a lot of people have been shifting towards wanting remote work options, and there have been studies that say that people up to like 73% of workers desire to work from home. And then another study showed that from individuals who worked from home during the pandemic, 58% of those have said that they would quit their job if they had to go back into the office full time. That seems, people say a lot of things, and then you have to go through the trouble of finding another job and deciding what you're going to do. But if it's working and it would make your employees happy and it would give you a more productive work environment, then a hybrid situation may be what you want to consider. Maybe employees come in 2 days a week. Maybe, the COVID cases in your location are not conducive to having everyone back in the office. So you have a hybrid setup of these departments come in on these days and these don't, so that we keep our numbers in the office down. There are several things that you could consider during this time. So if you do have a hybrid workspace, just make sure that you are being consistent in who is expected to be in the office and who is not. There could be kind of an us versus them mentality if some are permanently in the office and some are not, because managers tend to think if I don't see you, maybe you're not working as hard as those that I see in front of me, that are working and you kind of forget or think that they're not working as hard. And another study showed that managers are more likely to give a higher raise to those that work in the office that they could see than those that work from home. So you just kind of want to be in front of that mindset and have a plan in place of how you're going to administer raises, how you're going to gauge performance of those that are working from home. And just kind of, again, clear processes and clear policies are what you are going to want to see in terms of what managers focus on and what employees focus on. You want to emphasize inclusion and equity. So if you have a remote hybrid environment, you have an all-staff meeting, maybe you don't have everyone in a conference room and then remote in the employees, or conference in the employees at home. Maybe you say, everyone go to your office, we'll all be virtual so that we can all be together if you have employees who can't come in. That's just an option. Watch for signs of burnout. Again, being at home, you may work more in later hours and things like that. So just keep an eye on employees and have a way for them to take days off and take that time away. And again, just to reiterate that the things that we've said: be flexible, find ways to communicate, make work fun. And if you do move to a hybrid model, this is going to be a learning curve. So take it slow, have clear policies, and just take the time that you need to get it right so that you're not dealing with other issues down the road. So I believe that is all that I have. I'm going to go into the chat and see what questions we have. And again, if you have any additional questions at this time, you can type those in. Okay, looks like the question was, will the slides be available? Yes, we're going to be sending the slides out after this. And again, we are going to be sending out the policy so that you can see that. And then you'll have our contact information. So if you have any additional questions, we would be happy to take those and answer those for you. And I don't see any other questions.
Okay. We did get one, just came through. If an employee cannot establish a safe designated workspace at home, what is the expectation of the employer?
I believe if you have this, of course, is a case-by-case situation, but if an employee can't do their work at home and they cannot effectively essentially work a full-time position or work at home, then working from home may not be an option for them. One of the things that you're going to see in the policy that we send out is that you may have a policy against working in public environments like a Starbucks or a coffee shop, because maybe they have access to information that they need to keep confidential and they can't maintain confidentiality in public and on a open Wi-Fi network. So if they cannot ensure that they can work safely or they can work effectively, then maybe they are expected to come into the office until they can make other arrangements. That is just part of it, or as part of that stipend, that is part of that stipend that they get the equipment that they need. So is there a responsibility on the employer to discern if the space is safe? So there are some OSHA regulations around what is a safe environment. They don't require that you go and inspect it. You do not have to go and inspect it and make sure that they are set up in a certain way. You can just let employees know what they're expected to do and how they're expected to set up their work environment. And then if they have issues with that, they come to you. But I believe the OSHA requirements state that you are not required to go and inspect their home. So that is not on you to do. Okay. Any other questions?
We had one more. Do you have resources to share about taxation on stipends?
That is a good question. So the stipends are typically taxed at the supplemental rate. And that is a set flat rate that the IRS sets in terms of additional payments in addition to wages. So we can find a link and send that out as well. But typically stipends are taxed at the supplemental rate. It's up to you because you would need to decide, do you want to gross it up? If you say, I'm going to give you $200, are you going to gross it up and pay the difference for what the tax rate would be, so that, you know, you're paying that tax so they get the flat 200. That's up to you. Completely up to you. It's up to you, again, if you want to offer the stipend. And then also you may be required to, and I see a question coming through, hybrid costs more because you're providing internet communication stipend, et cetera, as well as furniture allowances. So yes, and it's up to you. Again, if some states may require you to reimburse for internet. You technically do not have to under most state laws. You can let employees know that, you know, they are required to provide that type of access if they want to work remotely. You may want to give them a stipend. You may be required to pay for part of it, again, if you're in one of those states. But I will say it depends. I would do research into your state and then clarify in your policy what you are going to offer and what you're not. And how are you going to decide which employees get what payment? Are you going to reimburse for cell phone for some and not for others? And how are you going to make that decision? What changes are there to mileage reimbursement policies for someone who works hybrid? That's a good question. I would say typically what you see in terms of those policies is the mileage rate is set for all employees, but you wouldn't reimburse for their normal commute, because if they're expected to go into the office and come back and they're working remotely, you wouldn't have to reimburse for their normal commute, but you would need to designate in your policy, are you going to pay that rate and for what travel? I wouldn't pay a lesser rate for individuals who work hybrid. I would set a mileage rate and then decide what you're going to reimburse for or not. So another question, is there a requirement to offer a stipend or reimbursement for use of home internet phones? So again, that's a state issue. Some states require it, some don't. I believe most do not, but you would want to research that in your state and determine if you are required to offer it or not. And then if you are going to offer it and you're not required to, again, decide how you are going to determine who gets that. And can you require a minimum bandwidth? I guess you could. It's really up to, is it interfering with their connection? If you have someone who's consistently dropping off meetings and they're not able to do their work from home, then you could definitely address that. But if you have someone who is an expert in bandwidth and what employees need to have, then yes, I think you could address that and make sure that they have the ability to do their work from home. If an employee is fully remote, do you pay mileage if they have to drive into the office for a meeting? If they live, like if they lived where they live now and they were coming into the office on a normal basis, and this is just a normal commute, then no, I would say that's part of a potentially normal commute. And I would put that in the policy, maybe that if employees working remotely, they may be required to come in for meetings. But no, a normal commute, I would not think that that would fall under what would be designated as mileage, unless they have, like, maybe they move further away and you want to address it in that way. If they live 2 hours away, really it's on the employee to be available. So I would look into your state regulations in terms of what is eligible, and then ultimately it's really up to you if you want to offer that or not. But if they were coming into the office and now they're not, and they still live in the same distance, then I would think that would be their commute, and it would not qualify for mileage, because that is reasonable that you would expect them to do that from time to time for different circumstances. And again, a lot of this is addressed in the policy that we're going to be sending out with examples. So again, the best thing that you can do is clarify what you will and won't cover, and what is expected of employees, that they may have to come in sometimes, that they could potentially work in the office again. If things change, this isn't guaranteed as part of their employment, and it doesn't change any other aspects of their employment. Okay, Andrew, do you see any other questions?
Nope, I think you've gotten it.
All right, well, we'll send out the resources again, and I'll send some additional links that I think may answer some of these questions so that you have those as well. And if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to Andrew or to myself, and we'll get those answered for you. Thank you all very much.